Hi, everyone, and welcome to Complex Functions Made Simple. My name is David Cameron. I'm a senior product lead here at Shopify. I've been here for over 8 years, and I'm incredibly excited to be able to talk to you today about functions. I spent the better part of my career here talking directly to Plus merchants and hearing firsthand some of the challenges that they ran into when trying to customize Shopify to better fit their needs. And so I'm going to talk to you about a number of updates that we've made to Shopify functions to enable more of that customization. And so let's get into it. One of the things, if you've used Shopify functions before, we've heard directly from you a number of issues that you ran into while working with functions. And I'm excited to be able to talk to you today about a number of improvements that we made to improve the situation. Now, before we get into that, I think it's really important that people understand, why do we have limits in the first place? Because we are enabling everyone in this room and online to be able to customize the checkout experience by inserting custom code into those buyer journeys. It's important that these things are as fast as possible. Every time we add some latency to that checkout process, a buyer is waiting on the other end. And in order to do that, we have a number of limits, binary size limits, which means, can we execute that code as fast as possible? We've got the actual instruction count limits, the measurement of how long your function actually takes to execute. And then we've also in the past restricted the number of functions that you can run at any point in time. Really, this is all in service of making sure that we continue to have a fast checkout. Now, we're going to talk about, in this agenda, there's some new improvements that we made to one of the more important function APIs, the discount function API. We're going to talk about some of the improvements that we made to both binary size as well as the performance of functions through a low-level WebAssembly API. I'm going to talk about some of the dramatic improvements that we made to our documentation to make it really, really easy to get started on functions. And then some enhancements that we made to Dev Assistant, so you can use AI to generate code for you. It has never been easier to build a function than it is today. You can now create really compelling buyer experiences powered by functions. Something that I heard firsthand from merchants and through our merchant success managers talking to merchants. An interesting idea. I want to create a tiered discounting campaign that is, buy 100, spend $100, I get 10% off. If I buy two of an item, I get 5% off. If I spend $150, I get free shipping, all powered by a single discount code. That is now possible today. It wasn't possible in the past. This is now possible through Shopify functions, and something that we recently introduced just around Editions. Now you can also build this with AI. So if you've got an idea of something that you want to see happen, you can describe that and have our Dev Assistant generate that for you. We also create faster, smaller functions. And so that tiered discount campaign that I just talked about, I coded that up using AI. And I showed what on the top here, you can see the performance of that function using our old tooling, the tooling that we had kind of a month ago. It produced a function that was 178 kilobytes. It produced a function that consumed about 100,000 instructions. For those that aren't familiar, we have a instruction count limit of 11 million. Basically, that's a very stable thing that you can reproduce on your local machine, measurement of how fast your function executes. So we can see here with the exact same input, kind of before and after adopting these low-level WebAssembly API, which results in these faster and smaller functions. It's now 73,000 instructions afterwards and about 50 kilobytes smaller. So how do we make this possible? Well, the main thing that we did here was previously all functions, for those that aren't familiar with functions, the way that it works is, as a developer, you describe, here's the data that I need. You do that through an input query where we'll grab all of that data from Shopify and pass it into your function so that your business logic can execute against that. You then have your business logic run and you output a set of operations to us. Well, previously what would happen is the first step of your function, and this was abstracted away in some of the tooling that we provide, it would consume all of that input. It would then convert that all into data structures. There was a bunch of overhead in kind of preparing that data for your business logic to use, which would mean that regardless of what your business logic was, you always spent this upfront time loading all of this data that you may never actually use. So what we've done instead is created a set of low-level APIs. And you don't have to worry about this as a developer. It sort of comes for free when you're using our first party language libraries. But what it does is, as your business logic executes, if you need data, we will go and fetch that data as you need it. The benefit of that is we no longer have to package in a JSON parsing library, which results in a much smaller binary. And it also means that if there's a lot of data within that initial payload that you're never actually going to actually use, you're never paying the cost for deserializing that data. And so ultimately, this is a great benefit for developers in the room. If you've been running into some of these instruction count limits or binary size limits, now you're going to get a much bigger headroom here for your functions. And it also means that a buyer is going to have a faster checkout, which is a great win on both parts. The other thing that we spent a fair bit of time going into Editions was really improving our documentation and making it easier for people to understand what they could build with functions and to get started. So now if you go take a look at our documentation on Shopify.dev, you're going to see for every single one of our function APIs a number of examples. These examples are showing real use cases that you can build with functions. Not only that, but we show you what the input could look like. We show you what the Rust code for that business logic would look like. And we show you the exact same equivalent JavaScript business logic. And so you can make a comparison between what would that look like for me to write that Rust code or JavaScript code. And then the other thing I want to point out is on every single one of our examples, we have this cost indicator. The reason why we do this is that you as a developer are going to have to make a choice on what language you're going to use. I highly recommend you use Rust because you're going to get a much faster function because of the nature of that function is compiled versus JavaScript, which is interpretive. So here you'll be able to see, kind of compare directly on our examples, what is the cost of those relative functions. Every single one of our function APIs has many examples. And so I encourage you to go through, explore, and see what is possible with every single one of our function APIs. The other piece of feedback that I got time and time again from the developer community, and I really appreciate hearing that feedback directly from you, is it was really difficult to understand exactly where each of these functions executed during a checkout flow. And what that meant was it wasn't always obvious to you what information would necessarily be available to you in that function, or why certain functions had an effect on kind of downstream functions. Now, on our documentation, you'll see this graphic here where you can get a very clear understanding of exactly where those functions execute in that flow. Another thing that we did was take all of those examples that I just showed you on our graphical reference docs, and we've inserted that into a knowledge base for our dev assistant. So previously, if you've used dev assistant, it was useful in migrating from REST to GraphQL. It was great at generating GraphQL mutations, so you could change some data on Shopify as well as GraphQL queries. We've enhanced its abilities so that it can now generate a function or a mostly working function for you. We all know how AI isn't necessarily 100%, but it gets you pretty close. And so you can use this as a starting point if you've got an idea of, hey, I'd like to build a function that does X, Y, Z. And we've got some examples there that you can use on Shopify.dev to get started. What you can do is enter in that tier discounting campaign idea that I described earlier in this presentation. Hey, I want to create a tier discount campaign. Spend $100, get 10% off. Buy two, get 5% off. You can enter that in as text, and the dev assistant will generate a complete function for you in Rust and or JavaScript. You can also leverage this if you have an existing JavaScript function and you want to take advantage of the new improvements that we made to faster and smaller functions. You can paste in your code here and say, hey, I'd like to generate a version of this in Rust. The other thing I want to highlight here is in the bottom right-hand corner of this dev assistant, it also talks about our dev MCP server. So if you're using model context servers, you can now plug that into your favorite IDE and take advantage of all of the examples that we built on kind of what does good look like, and really supercharge your local development to accelerate the time that it takes you to build a function or evolve a function or convert that from JavaScript to Rust. We also heard that merchants were finding it quite limiting in terms of the number of functions that they can enable. So generally how functions work is you have your business logic, and then you can separate your business logic from your configuration. This makes it possible to create kind of a function that could work across many different brands and merchants while having very specific configuration for that particular shop. And so what would end up happening is merchants would install or create their own functions from various public apps or their own custom apps and be limited in terms of the number of configurations that they could enable or activate at the same time. We've now increased that to 25. So previously it was around 5 for a number of these function APIs. We've increased that to 25, which will now make it possible for merchants to configure many different scenarios. Say, I want to have different payment customizations for different buyer groups. You can do that today. So again, trying to make more things possible, make it easier to build functions that are specific to a particular use case, and make it possible for merchants to configure, enable, and disable those independently of all of the other functions that are executing. So those are a number of enhancements that we made to Shopify functions. I'd highly encourage you to dive into our documentation, to try the dev assistant, and to explore what is possible with Shopify functions and how we can make Shopify even more customizable for our merchants. Thank you.